The night of the Rideau Club charity gala, I had a folded letter in my clutch purse. My mother-in-law didn't know about it, neither did my husband, and when the evening ended, nothing in any of our lives would ever look the same again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, a Tuesday afternoon in October, standing in my own kitchen, holding a casserole dish I had made from scratch, while my mother-in-law told my husband that he deserved better than me. She didn't lower her voice. She never did. I had been married to her son for 3 years by then. 3 years of driving 40 minutes to their house in Kannada every Sunday for dinner. 3 years of bringing food she never ate, compliments she never accepted, and conversation she never encouraged. 3 years of watching her look through me like I was a smudge on a window she was trying to see out of. My name is Simone. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, in a house where the heat sometimes didn't work properly in January, and my mother stretched one rotisserie chicken across 3 dinners. I am not ashamed of that. It made me careful with money, good at problem solving, and deeply unimpressed by people who confuse wealth with worth. I say this not to perform humility, but because you need to understand where I come from, to understand what came next. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he was then, was the kind of man who seemed wonderful in the first year. Attentive, funny. He'd grown up in a big house in Nepean with a private school education and a mother who had opinions about everything, including, eventually, me. He told me his mother just needed time to warm up. I believed him longer than I should have. His mother, I'll call her my mother-in-law because giving her a name feels like more than she earned, was a retired executive who had spent 30 years managing people and never quite stopped. She had the kind of effortless condescension that doesn't shout, it simply arranges itself in the air around you until breathing feels like an imposition. She made comments about my apartment before we got married. She made comments about my job. She made comments about the way I pronounced certain words, which, coming from someone who'd lived her whole life in Ottawa, struck me as particularly rich. I was a registered nurse at the Ottawa hospital. I had been for 6 years. I worked cardiac care 12-hour shifts, nights and weekends, holidays I will never get back. I held people's hands when they were frightened. I caught medication errors before they became tragedies. I went home smelling like antiseptic and sometimes cried in the car before I could make myself drive. It was not glamorous work. It was the most important work I have ever done. My mother-in-law called it a fine starter career. She said this at Christmas dinner, the second year we were married, while passing the cranberry sauce. A fine starter career, as though I were 22 and still figuring things out. As though the 6 years and the late certifications and the weekend I had skipped my own birthday because we were short-staffed on the unit, as though none of that had actually happened. I looked at my husband. He was refilling his wine. I think that was the moment I understood something important. Not yet what I would do about it. Just that something had shifted, quietly, in the architecture of what I had believed my marriage to be. My mother-in-law had a very specific vision for her son. It included a wife who came from the right background, went to the right schools, and moved in the right circles. Ottawa has those circles, old money and government money, and the particular social layer that attends charity galas and sits on hospital boards and knows which restaurants you call by the chef's first name. She was in those circles. I was not. And she had apparently decided sometime around our engagement that the fastest solution was to remove me from the equation entirely. She was just patient about it. I'll give her that. The comments started small. The kind you can't quite confront without seeming sensitive. My cooking was good, but did I know that her son had always preferred Thai food? My work schedule was admirable, but wasn't it hard on a marriage, all those overnight shifts? My friends were lovely, she was sure. Though she'd never met them, she simply assumed out loud that we probably didn't have much in common with the couples they socialized with. My husband absorbed all of this the way furniture absorbs sunlight. Slowly, without appearing to notice it was happening. I tried for a long time. I genuinely did. I brought better wine. I researched recipes. I dressed carefully for every Sunday dinner. knowing she would notice and assess and find some small, polite way to let me know I'd landed just slightly wrong. I tried to build a relationship with a woman who had already decided she didn't want one with me, and I kept trying because I loved her son and because I am, at my core, someone who does not give up easily. That is not always a virtue. The October that everything changed, I had just finished a run of 6 night shifts in a row. We were short 2 nurses on the unit, and I had picked up extra shifts because that is what you do, because there are patients who need care regardless of staffing spreadsheets. I came home on a Thursday morning and slept until 2 in the afternoon, and when I woke up, I made a casserole because my husband had mentioned his mother was coming by, and I still wanted, even then, for things to be okay. She arrived at 4. I heard them talking in the kitchen while I was changing out of my pajamas, and I stopped at the top of the stairs when I heard my name. Not because I meant to eavesdrop, because you stop when you hear your name spoken in a tone like that. She was saying that she had spoken to a family lawyer. A family lawyer. She had done research. She had numbers, actual numbers, about what a divorce would cost, what assets were protected, what timeline was realistic. She was talking about my marriage the way a project manager talks about winding down a contract. Methodical. Already past the emotional part. And my husband said, I know, Mum, I know. Not I disagree with you. Not please stop talking about my wife this way. Not what you're doing is wrong and I won't be part of it. I know. I stood on the stairs for a long time. The casserole was still warm in the oven. I could smell it from the hallway. I went back to the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about the Sunday dinners and the Christmas cranberry sauce and the 6 years of nursing and the nights I had cried in the car, and I thought about what it means to know your own value when the people around you have decided, quietly and without your input, that you don't have any. And then I stopped crying and started thinking, I am not someone who makes rash decisions. That is a nursing thing, maybe, or just a Sudbury thing. You assess, you plan, you do not move until you understand what you're moving toward. I did not confront my husband that afternoon. I did not call a lawyer, not yet. I went downstairs, took the casserole out of the oven, and set it on the counter. And when my mother in law looked at me with that particular expression she had, politely indifferent, like I was a service person she was waiting for, I smiled and asked if she'd like to stay for dinner. She stayed. She ate. She complimented the dish. I started making notes that evening. There is a woman I work with, a nurse practitioner named Gwen, who has been in healthcare for 25 years and who has the kind of clarity that comes from watching people at their most vulnerable for a very long time. Gwen is not warm in the obvious way. She does not hug you or tell you things will be fine. She hands you coffee and tells you what she actually thinks, and I have come to understand that this is its own kind of love. I told Gwen what I had heard on the stairs. I told her about the lawyer. I told her about the Sunday dinners and the cranberry sauce and my husband's voice saying, I know, Mum, I know. Gwen looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, what do you want your life to look like in 5 years? Not what do you want to do about your mother-in-law. Not how are you going to handle this. What do you want your life to look like? I thought about it for 3 days. What I wanted was to stop feeling like a problem someone else was trying to solve. I wanted to walk into a room and take up my full amount of space. I had been making myself smaller for 3 years. In that house in Kannada, in the Sunday dinners, in the way I described my job to people I thought might look at me the way she did. And I was tired of it in a way that went down to the bone. I enrolled in the nurse practitioner program at the University of Ottawa the following month. Part-time, evenings, online when possible, because I was still working full shifts and I was not going to ask my husband for anything to make it happen. I used my own savings. I arranged my own schedule. I told no one except Gwen. I also called a lawyer. Not to file for divorce, not yet. To understand what I was entitled to, what was protected, what 3 years of marriage in Ontario actually meant legally for someone whose husband had been quietly consulting with his mother about the best way to end it. What I learned surprised me. It also clarified things considerably. My mother-in-law had been at this longer than I knew. There were conversations my husband had been having with their family lawyer, a private firm on Spark Street, that predated my conversation on the stairs by at least a year. The family had assets in trusts, certain accounts had been restructured. These were not crimes, but they were choices, deliberate ones, made while I was working night shifts and bringing casseroles and trying to make a marriage work that the other side had already begun dismantling. I did not let this make me angry. Anger is expensive and I could not afford it. I let it make me focused. The Redo Club Charity Gala was in February. It was an annual fundraiser for the Ottawa Hospital Foundation, the same hospital where I worked, which I found bitterly funny, and my mother in law sat on the foundation board. It was the crown jewel of her social calendar. Black tie, silent auction, 400 guests from Ottawa's political and professional class, and my mother in law in her element, moving through the room like she had built it herself. My husband and I had been invited as a couple, as we were every year. I had attended twice before and smiled through both evenings while his mother introduced me to people as his wife, in the specific tone that made it sound like a transitional arrangement. This year was different. I had received something in the mail 2 weeks before the gala, and I had placed it, carefully folded, in the clutch purse I planned to carry. I got ready alone that evening. My husband was meeting a colleague for a drink first and would meet me there, which I had expected and had planned for. I wore a dress I had bought in November, dark green, the kind of thing I would not have worn 3 years ago, because I would have worried it was too much. I drove myself downtown. I parked on Queen Street. I walked into the Rideau Club on my own 2 feet and I did not feel small. My mother in law saw me arrive, and her expression arranged itself into the version of a smile she kept for people she found inconvenient. She was standing with the hospital's chief of medicine and 2 members of the foundation board. She gestured me over with that air she had, gracious and proprietary at once, and introduced me to the group. And then she said, because she could not help herself, because I think she genuinely believed I had no resources to respond. She said that it was so lovely that the nursing staff could attend events like this. Wasn't it wonderful how the foundation reached across all levels? Across all levels, in front of the chief of medicine. The chief of medicine, whose name is Dr. Fournier, who I have worked with for 4 years and who I had spoken to approximately 45 minutes earlier when I arrived, and he had greeted me with genuine warmth. Dr. A. Fournier looked at my mother-in-law with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He said, Simone isn't just nursing staff. She's one of the best clinical minds on the cardiac unit. We're actually hoping she'll consider a clinical lead role when she finishes her NP program. We'd be lucky to keep her. My mother-in-law's smile did not move. It just became a different kind of still. I said thank you quietly to Dr. Fournier, and then I excused myself to find my table. My husband arrived 20 minutes later. He found me at the table, sat down, kissed my cheek. He did not ask how I was doing. He poured wine and began talking to the man to his left about a development project in Barhavin. The dinner was served. The speeches were made. The silent auction numbers were handed around. I ate my meal and I listened. And I was, for perhaps the first time in 3 years in that social world, entirely present, because I was not spending any energy on performing composure. The composure was real. After dessert, my mother-in-law stood to give remarks as a board member. She was good at this. She was in many ways an impressive woman. I had always known that. She spoke about the foundation's work, about the hospital, about the importance of community investment. She received genuine applause. My husband leaned over and said, She's remarkable, isn't she? I looked at him. He meant it entirely. There was no irony in it. And in that moment, I understood, with the kind of clarity you can only get after a long time of not wanting to see something, that he would always mean it, that she would always come first. That the year of restructured assets and conversations with lawyers on Spark Street And I know, Mum, I know, had not been a crisis he was navigating. It had been a decision he had already made and was simply waiting to formalize. I reached into my clutch purse. I took out the folded letter. I placed it on the table in front of him. He looked at it, then at me. It was a letter from my lawyer. It outlined what I knew about the asset restructuring. It outlined what I was entitled to under Ontario family law, regardless of those structures. It outlined the date my lawyer would be filing, which was the following Monday, and it said very clearly that I wished him well and expected the same in return, and that any further contact regarding the settlement should be directed to my legal counsel. He stared at the letter for a long time. Around us, the room continued, glasses clinking, someone laughing at another table, the string quartet starting up near the bar. He said, "You can't do this here." I said, "I'm not doing anything here. I'm just making sure you have time to read it before Monday." I picked up my clutch purse. I stood up. I smoothed my green dress. His mother was across the room. She saw me stand. She saw his face. She began making her way toward us, reading the room with the quick social intelligence she had spent decades developing. She reached the table. She looked at the letter. She looked at me. I said, "Thank you for including me in these evenings. The hospital does wonderful work." And I walked out. I drove home on the 417 with the radio off, and I thought about Gwen asking me what I wanted my life to look like in 5 years, and I thought about the answer I had been building quietly in the margins of my shifts and the evenings at my kitchen table with my NP coursework for the past 4 months. The settlement took 8 months. My lawyer was thorough and so was his, but Ontario family law is fairly clear, and the asset structures his mother had arranged were not as airtight as she had believed. I received what I was entitled to. Not dramatically more, not less. In my eyes, to one who sties, I was start who sties, and put a down payment on a one-bedroom condo in Central Town, 2 blocks from the Rideau Canal. I finished my nurse practitioner program 14 months after I enrolled. I walked across a stage at the University of Ottawa on a Thursday afternoon in June, and Gwen was in the audience, and my mother, who had driven down from Sudbury 5 hours on her own, was there too, and she cried, which made me cry. And we went for dinner at a Lebanese place on Elgin Street and split a bottle of wine and talked until the restaurant wanted to close. I took the clinical lead position at the hospital. It pays $114,000 a year. I manage a team of 11 nurses and 2 NPs. I sit in on department meetings and I have opinions and I share them and people listen. And it is still strange to me sometimes. Not because I doubt that I belong there, but because belonging feels different than I expected. Quieter. More like breathing than like winning. My mother-in-law still sits on the hospital foundation board. I see her at interdepartmental events occasionally. She is always perfectly composed. So am I. We do not pretend we have something we don't have, which is at least honest. My ex-husband remarried last year. I heard this through someone we used to know mutually. I hope he is happy. I mean that with less bitterness than it might sound. I genuinely hope he found someone whose existence doesn't feel to him like a problem requiring management. Some people need a partner who fits more neatly into their mother's vision of the world. I am not that person. I have never been that person. I just took longer than I should have to understand that this was not a failure on my part. The condo is small. There is a crack in the tile behind the bathroom sink that I keep meaning to fix. In the morning, I can see the canal from the bedroom window if I stand at the right angle. And in winter, the skaters are out there, and it is genuinely one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen from a place that is entirely mine. Gwen asked me recently whether I had any regrets about leaving, about how long I stayed, about any of it. I thought about the stairs and the casserole and the December I spent being described as a fine starter career while passing the cranberry sauce. I thought about the 8 months of settlement paperwork and the evenings alone in the apartment we had shared while my name was being slowly removed from a life I had tried to build there. I thought about a green dress and a letter on a table and the specific feeling of walking out of a room on your own terms. No, I told her. Not anymore.